Jim Sterling.
Fucking prick.
Jim Sterling is a filthy hypocrite, and today I would like to show you all why. What's up guys, it's Sir Thorn here and welcome to another video game industry discussion video. I do these analysis and discussion videos on a regular basis, so if you'd like to see more of them, hit that subscribe button to stay notified. Also, if you enjoy my content, please consider whitelisting my channel from your ad blocker and potentially supporting me on Patreon and or channel memberships. The first Jim Sterling video I ever saw was his video Bethesda's paid mods that aren't paid mods but are paid mods, where he crapped all over Bethesda's Creation Club. I honestly rolled my eyes at this video because it came across as just somebody shitting on Bethesda for no other reason than because shitting on Bethesda is in fashion at the moment. The video that prompted me to subscribe to his channel was the video The Addictive Cost of Predatory Video Game Monetization. I was absolutely blown away by the thoroughness of his research and the professionalism he displayed while taking the AAA video game industry to task for their insidious monetization practices. Since then, I became a regular viewer of his content. In fact, I watched his content so regularly that I even saved the playlist for the Jimquisition and proceeded to have it play in the background while I was getting other work done, just so that I could have some background noise. Now, because the various episodes of the Jimquisition are meant to be consumed independently of each other as standalone videos, I like to turn on the shuffle feature for YouTube playlists so that the next video that played in the background was randomly determined. This, ladies and gentlemen, is when I started to notice how much of a hypocrite Jim Sterling was. See, because the Jimquisition has been making weekly episodes ever since 2014, his earlier videos tend to be spaced quite a bit apart from his more recent ones if I were watching them in order. Because of this, fans who have been following his content for quite some time may hear him say one thing in 2019 and completely forget that he said the complete opposite thing back in 2015, because for most of his fans that was 4 years ago. However, because I have the shuffle feature turned on, I can hear something as I'm doing my own work, and it may completely contradict something I recall hearing him say just a few minutes prior. The self-contradiction is therefore much easier for me to spot. Now, most of the time, I'm willing to give some people the benefit of the doubt when it comes to hypocrisy, as I rarely have any direct evidence of any one person making self-contradicting statements. For example, I have a video on my channel where I explained why I believe The Elder Scrolls III Morrowind is an overrated game. Many commenters on that video attempted to explain to me, as if I don't fucking know already, that the majority of problems I complained about in that video can be fixed with mods. Meanwhile, I often hear people criticize Bethesda for relying too heavily on mods to fix the game's problems for them. Those two stances, they are not compatible. One is literally the complete opposite of the other. Granted, I have come down on the issue myself. In my videos, Why Bethesda Isn't Actually Becoming EA with Sources, as well as my nearly 3-hour-long video, Skyrim Retrospective Does It Still Hold Up?, I explain that whether you see the availability of mods as legitimately fixing the game's problems, or if you see them as an excuse for the developer to half-ass the game development, largely depends on how much you enjoy the game without mods. The problem there, however, is that this initial hurdle is an almost completely subjective assessment. Now, I have explained that position in the aforementioned 2 videos, however, I, at least, own up to my own subjectivity. However, I am willing to give the vast majority of people in this debate the benefit of the doubt. Yes, it's frustrating seeing these two incompatible arguments brought to the table so often, but as of the time of this writing, I do not have any direct evidence that any one person has defended Morrowind's flaws on the grounds that the availability of mods make the game's many flaws a moot point, while simultaneously scoffing at Skyrim and Fallout 4 for quote-unquote relying on the modding community to do the game developers' jobs for them, all in one voice. For all I know, the two factions in this debate may have clear party lines, with no one person switching back and forth between the two teams. But I cannot say the same thing for Jim Sterling. Thanks to my shuffling of the Jimquisition playlist, I have noticed him say one thing in one of his earlier videos, and for absolutely no apparent reason, turn right around and take the completely opposite approach to the same issue whenever the court of public opinion, in all of its arbitrary glory, decides that X game company has done a naughty. So, without any further ado, let's move on to Number 1. Sterling's views on whether games contain political messages. This is featured so low on the list primarily because it is honestly the least harmful of all his hypocrisies. Oh yeah, we're gonna be getting into some actual tangible harm he's inflicting onto other people later in this video. So, Jim Sterling really likes Dark Souls. Cool, go ahead and love your Dark Souls. Go ahead and fap to Dark Souls if it makes you happy. Anyway, he makes a video called The Political Agenda of Dark Souls, where he discusses the political undertones he feels the game has. Again, cool. Regulars at my channel know that I love me a good video game story analysis video, so even though I don't really care for Dark Souls myself, I still found his input on the game's alleged political undertones quite intriguing, although I did find some of his theories to be a little stretchy. Namely, I really don't find this argument of his very compelling.
They would rather have a miserable, inhospitable, decayed Age of Fire than none at all. They would rather have a dying world than a world in which they do not rule. Something climate change.
Wait, a ruler wants to hold on to his power by any means necessary? How is that a metaphor for the Republican politicians burying their heads in the sand on the issue of global warming? The concept of a ruler wanting to hold on to his power by any means necessary could be a reference to practically anything. Jim Sterling only sees climate change as the symbolism behind this game's story because it's a political issue that is still relevant at the time he is alive and a registered voter. The idea of a ruler, any ruler, not wanting to give up his power lightly could just as easily apply to, say, the dying years of the Roman Empire. However, Jim Sterling wasn't around back when that was the hot political topic of the day, so he doesn't see Dark Souls as symbolic of that. Now, this is all fine and good, but where's the actual hypocrisy? Just because I disagree with one of his observations doesn't mean he's a filthy hypocrite. Well, to understand the hypocrisy, we need to listen to how he actually opens up his analysis of Dark Souls' plot.
The truth is, however, politics can be found in most things, even when they're not overt. If you do a bit of digging, even the most simple artistic work often has something of meaning to say. And that something, even when the artist claims otherwise, is more often than not rooted in politics.
So, his philosophy regarding the political undertones in video game stories is that all video game stories have political undertones, even if they aren't overtly intended by the game developers. More importantly, he scoffs at the accusation that he is quote-unquote forcing his own political views onto an incompatible story. He finds the idea of shoehorning political undertones into a story to be preposterous because it isn't shoehorning in the slightest. However, if he actually felt that way, then why would he have created his video in September 2016 called Oh Virginia? That video discussed a game that served as a murder mystery puzzle game that featured an African-American female as the protagonist. Now, I wasn't paying attention to that game's zeitgeist, so I don't know exactly what the controversy was. I can only go by what Jim Sterling himself said in his own video. In that video, he took that game's haters to task because the haters had supposedly criticized the game for quote-unquote forcing its left-wing political agenda onto them. Now, assuming that Sterling is not oversimplifying the criticisms he is responding to, assuming that these people really were crying foul over this game solely because it had a black female protagonist, which I highly doubt, because very few people in the 21st century are so openly racist and sexist as to openly proclaim the mere presence of a minority protagonist as inherently forceful onto them, but that's a discussion for another day. Let's give Jim Sterling that much benefit of the doubt on this issue. It still does not excuse him giving the following retort to their alleged racism.
Once you start accusing games of being things they're quite literally not, when you start seeing political agendas that are not there, the only conclusion one can reasonably draw is that you're the one doing the shoehorning. You're the one with an overwhelming political agenda that you can't keep control of.
These two positions are not compatible with one another. In 2016, he says that people need to fuck off reading political messages into games that quote-unquote clearly don't have political meanings. Then, just shy of 3 years later, he decides that he's going to shoehorn his own political views into a game solely because the game has a ruler who doesn't want to give up his power lightly, the inspiration of which could have come from literally anywhere. So which is it, Jimmy? Which is your position on this issue? Should people abstain from reading political symbolism into an incompatible game? Or can any game have political symbolism found in it if you open your mind enough? As you yourself pointed out in your Jimquisition video, The Cost of Doing Business,
that's the thing about conflicting stories, you sort of have to pick one.
Now, as I said earlier, this is honestly the self-contradiction that pisses me off the least, since it frankly causes the least amount of harm to other people. However, we are about to get into some hypocrisies from Jim Sterling that really do affect people. Number 2. Cosmetics. Do they matter? This is a much more serious hypocrisy than the political symbolism of a game, because the debate as to whether, and if so to what extent, video games should have microtransactions is an important discussion in the modern times. So when Jim Sterling, one of the leaders of the faction that says that AAA games shouldn't have microtransactions in any capacity, can't keep his story straight about whether AAA games should have microtransactions or not, then maybe he doesn't deserve the leadership spot he currently enjoys. If you're just casually viewing his content, he seems to be pretty hard-lined on his position. He even dedicates an entire episode of the Jimquisition exclusively to explain why he believes cosmetics matter when it comes to microtransactions. In addition to that entire episode, he also includes the occasional quib in other videos, such as these.
People claim cosmetic microtransactions are fine because they don't affect gameplay, but they do. The effect cosmetic rewards have on Borderlands 3 and one's enjoyment of it is tangible. No, it doesn't make you better at the game, but that's only one way we judge gameplay, and acting like it's the only metric is being willfully blinkered. And you can repeat, "It's just cosmetic, it doesn't affect the game," as many times as you want, but we both know that's fucking bullshit. You know, maybe I'm a traditionalist, but I think games are more than a kill-death ratio. I think everything in a game affects a game.
So, some of you Sterling fans out there are probably wondering, at what point did Sterling ever state that cosmetics didn't matter, or that they were so insignificant as to not be worth discussing? Well, he actually states this literally less than 4 months before he published his video dedicated exclusively to debunking the Just Cosmetic misconception. That video was published on December 18th, 2017, but less than 4 months later, on August 30, 2017, he published the video Bethesda's paid mods that aren't paid mods but are paid mods. That video was dedicated primarily to ripping apart Bethesda's Creation Club. Oh, we'll get to that hypocrisy later. But when he's discussing the actual quality of the content offered by the Creation Club, he says this.
What did it do instead? Skins, mostly. The laziest, most obvious, least substantial content you could imagine is what Bethesda chose to launch with.
Wait, I thought you were of the opinion that cosmetics were valuable. I thought you specifically said that the ability to dress your character however you like was something genuinely enjoyable that AAA game companies have taken out of the game and locked behind a paywall. So now you're saying that cosmetic-only DLC is such utter trash that it's an insult to call it a DLC? Look, Jim, you can't have it both ways. Either cosmetics matter, which means the Creation Club is indeed delivering some value to the customers, or cosmetics are bottom-of-the-barrel DLC, which means other game companies that only offer cosmetic-only microtransactions aren't selling anything truly important to the game. So, which is it? Oh wait, I think I know which it is. Maybe the problem isn't so much that cosmetics do indeed matter. Maybe the problem is that you just don't like Bethesda. When the Creation Club was first created, the majority of people were in agreement that the skins being offered weren't enough to justify the Creation Club's existence, so you jumped aboard the Bethesda hate bandwagon in order to get those sweet, sweet outrage clicks.
I think everything in a game affects a game. Skins, mostly. The laziest, most obvious, least substantial content you could imagine. That's the thing about conflicting stories, you sort of have to pick one.
Rather than having a clear stance on the value of cosmetics, you choose whichever side is most convenient in that moment to shit on the AAA game industry, even if it results in you saying two completely incompatible things. Your position on the value of cosmetics will change from week to week, and sometimes even from day to day, based on whatever gets you the most clicks on any given video. Well, at that point, I have to give an honorable mention to your hypocrisy regarding sticking to your guns, because in your video about Modern Warfare 3, you say the following.
Critic whose job should be to give you their opinion, not just regurgitate yours back at you.
But that doesn't get you outrage clicks, does it? And speaking of the Creation Club, that leads me to my next point. Number 3. Paid mods. Bad idea in practice or bad idea on paper? Okay, so Bethesda's paid mod system from 2015 was a dumpster fire. So 2 years later, Bethesda launched the Creation Club, a similar, but not identical, system that purportedly had all the good things about paid mods, but without any of the most common flaws. Naturally, people looking for outrage clicks argued that this was just Bethesda trying the same old shit as before and just calling it something different. One such person was Jim Sterling.
Bethesda revealed the Creation Club for Fallout 4 and Skyrim, a service that definitely isn't paid mods because Bethesda said it wasn't. Okay? Glad we cleared that up.
Now, before I continue, I want to emphasize that this is not the same paid mod system as before. This isn't like EA trying to rebrand their loot boxes as surprise mechanics, despite them being functionally, mechanically, and psychologically identical to the loot boxes of years past. This isn't like the numerous Unit Z clones that flood the Steam storefront, where the so-called developers make no changes whatsoever to the game besides just calling it something different and expecting that to pass as an entirely new game. Do you guys remember back in 2015 when the whole paid mod controversy first surfaced? Do you guys remember what the most common criticisms of that system were? I do! But just in case you don't remember, let me play a few clips from Jim Sterling's 2015 video, so let's talk about mods being sold on Steam to try and jog your memory.
It's very hard to argue that the modders who keep games worth buying deserve absolutely zero compensation for the hard work they put into their craft. So, in principle, I'm for the idea of modders getting paid. I'm totally in favour of content creators of all stripes getting cash for creativity. In a contextless vacuum, I like the idea. This shit ain't happening in a vacuum, however. First of all, there's a perfectly understandable fear that the cynicism that's infected every other aspect of Steam won't bleed into the workshop. Unity asset buying, pre-alpha selling, overcharging, dishonest hacks who just take the piss. The Steam front page store itself has an overwhelming avalanche of dishonestly presented, patently broken, low-quality games. Rank amateurs sell Babby's first game project at a profit. And we're already seeing the abuse come to the workshop with things like horse genitals for $99. The legality of this is already a mess, with mods that require other mods to work at all, modders taking assets from other modders and charging for them. And what happens when an official game update breaks a mod? It's a fucking shit show.
So the idea of modders being compensated for their work isn't something you have a problem with, at least on paper. Rather, the problem is the anticipated lack of quality control, the legal trouble of mixing commercial and non-commercial assets without obtaining written permission from those you borrow the assets from, and of course the risk of mods you just paid for simply being broken. Well, I've got news for you, buddy. The Creation Club fixes all of those problems. Modders don't get paid until their projects are manually approved by Bethesda first, which ensures a modicum of quality control. The Creation Club mods have to be comprised either of in-game vanilla assets or 100% original assets, so the legal ramifications of stealing assets isn't a problem anymore, and the mods are guaranteed to be compatible with your game. So yay! Bethesda figured out the puzzle! They cultivated the flowers and culled the weeds. Now modders can finally receive compensation for their hard work. Yay! Unfortunately, we just can't have nice things. As the old saying goes, haters gonna hate. It doesn't matter what Bethesda does, because those who already don't like Bethesda are going to shit on Bethesda no matter what, especially when there's YouTube views to be had. So now that Bethesda haters can no longer criticize the Creation Club for its shoddy execution, they instead criticize the idea of paid mods, even in principle. I mean, it's either that, or admit that Bethesda actually did something right, and that is entirely out of the question. So Jim Sterling, despite stating previously that he was okay with the idea of modders receiving compensation for their work, now finds the idea of paying for mods in any capacity to be preposterous.
It looked like little more than a thinly veiled way for Bethesda to resurrect its disastrous paid mod scheme. Remember that? Yeah, Bethesda's short-lived attempt to charge for game modifications. An attempt that failed because charging money so blatantly for things PC users have freely enjoyed for decades is just a bad idea.
Okay, Jim, what exactly do you have a problem with? Do you object to the idea of modders being compensated for their hard work? Do you have a problem with that happening in literally any capacity? Well, I suppose it's your right to feel that way, but then, don't go around also saying things like,
"It's very hard to argue that the modders who keep games worth buying deserve absolutely zero compensation for the hard work they put into their craft. So, in principle, I'm for the idea of modders getting paid. I'm totally in favour of content creators of all stripes getting cash for creativity. In a contextless vacuum, I like the idea."
you know what I think? I think your only true stance on this topic is, you don't like Bethesda, so you will criticize anything Bethesda does, no matter how invalid the criticism is. That's the only way your criticism seems consistent.
I'm for the idea of modders getting paid. Charging money so blatantly for things PC users have freely enjoyed for decades is just a bad idea. That's the thing about conflicting stories, you sort of have to pick one.
Number 4. What exactly is optional in games? So, anytime somebody, either a corporate representative or an apologist for the AAA game industry, argues that microtransactions are okay because they are just optional, Jim Sterling always counters that argument with the following line.
These microtransactions are never optional because none of us have the option to not have the microtransactions in there to begin with.
Even taken on its own merit, that argument is ridiculously undeveloped. Just because it's in the game, how does that mean it's not optional? How does that work? How does that even make any sense? I'd buy this if there was a previous video he repeatedly made reference to in his newer videos where he actually explained his logic more thoroughly. Then, his extremely shallow argument that we, quote, don't have the option of not having them in the game in the first place could be seen as an abridged recapping of those points. However, I have listened to the vast majority of the Jimquisition videos, and I can't recall a single time when he actually went into any kind of detail to explain his position. But even if there's an in-depth explanation somewhere on his channel that I haven't found on my own yet, Sterling certainly does not refer us to such an explanation whenever he makes this excessively oversimplified argument. So, until I see some evidence to the contrary, I'm going to act on the assumption that this really is as deep as he's willing to go when justifying his belief that microtransactions are not optional. The mere fact that they are in the game in the first place, in any capacity, means that they are necessarily mandatory. Well, in that case, nothing in a game can ever be considered optional, because if it's in the game in any capacity, it's not optional. Universe mode in the WWE 2K series? It's not optional, because we don't have the option of not having it in the game to fucking begin with. Multiplayer in Cyberpunk 2077? Not optional. We can't choose to not have it in the game in any way, shape, or form, so CD Projekt Red might as well be breaking into your home, putting a gun to your head, and forcing you under duress to play the multiplayer mode. Zero difficulty in Star Fox? Smart steering in Mario Kart? Or a hypothetical easy mode in Dark Souls or Sekiro? Well, it's in the game, so it's 100% mandatory that you play in that mode. And some of you can see where I'm going with this. Jim Sterling has, on multiple occasions in the past, scoffed at other people who criticized games for having easy modes and hypothetical suggestions that games without easy modes should have said modes patched in. His exact words were,
"What exactly is so harmful about a completely optional mode that you never have to experience? What is so harmful about a completely optional mode that you never have to experience? If you do happen to die enough times to spawn the leaf, you never have to take it. It's not thrust upon you the moment you take your sixth go. It still has to be picked up. It can be ignored completely, and the only way it negatively affects you as a player is if you're driven to rage at the idea of people who aren't you getting to enjoy a game you're enjoying."
well, Jimmy, the problem there is that your argument is predicated on the assumption that an easy mode is optional. However, by your own verbatim logic, it's not optional because none of us have the option of not having it in the game to begin with. But we can take that a step further if we like. See, if we accept your logic that the only way for any part of a game to be optional is if it isn't in the game in the first place, then by that logic, you shouldn't complain about games being released with multiple editions. Because buying an edition of the game that has only the features you want is, by your own admission, the only way for gamers to have any options in their games. The only explanation I can possibly think of that would give Sterling any presumption of good faith on this issue, and bear in mind that this is pure speculation on my part, I don't know for certain because Sterling doesn't tell us, is that the mere presence of microtransactions is not optional because their mere presence is tempting and tantalizing to those vulnerable to shopping addictions and who lack self-discipline and patience. A psychologically vulnerable person can't play a game with microtransactions in them at all without risking falling back down the rabbit hole of compulsive spending. Okay, fair enough. To that I say, you do realize that critics of the easy modes argued a similar stance, right? In fact, you even acknowledged that argument in your own videos. You argued that this problem isn't actually a problem because you personally don't find the presence of an easy mode very tempting. And to hell with how other people may feel similarly tempted. No, seriously, that was Sterling's argument.
The argument is that an easy mode would detract from the experience because after a boss has beaten you to a pulp 30 times, we'd all be tempted by the easier fight. That's never happened to me, and I'm not even very good at video games, so I don't know what a real hardcore gamer would struggle with there.
So let me get this straight, Jim. The sole determining factor in whether a feature is considered optional in a game is whether you, personally, in your sole subjective discretion, feel like you can easily ignore it without feeling tempted to use it. It doesn't matter who else may find themselves pressured into taking advantage of something. As long as you personally don't feel so pressured, then it's optional for everybody. And nobody has the right to complain about a feature as long as you personally don't mind. Is that basically your position in a nutshell, Jim? Of course, I can't know for certain because your explanation of how you feel about the issue begins and ends with microtransactions are not optional because we don't have the option of not having them in the game to begin with. That's literally as deep as it appears to go with you. Now, for the record, I actually agree that microtransactions are not optional. I even made a video about how they are not optional. But I do not argue that they are not optional simply because they are in the game in the first place in any capacity. The TLDW version of that video is that microtransactions, and especially loot boxes, are not optional because they are scientifically proven to be addictive, and addictions are not optional. You'll have to see the whole video for more details. Now see what I did there? I referred you to a video I made in the past, rather than expecting you to accept my one-sentence explanation with no further context. Furthermore, rather than asking you to go digging through the haystack that is my channel in search of a needle that may or may not even exist, I straight up showed you where the needle was so you could beeline straight to it. If I can do it, Jim Sterling sure as fuck can. YouTube allows you to provide up to 5 links to other videos or playlists in each of your videos, so why not take advantage of it? And now it's time for the main event. Number 5. He doesn't understand the difference between censorship and editing, and then accuses others of hypocrisy. Okay, so Jim Sterling accepts that there is a distinction between censorship and editing. Cool. He defends Devil May Cry's editing of its own cutscenes on the grounds that it was only editing due to the developer's artistic choices, rather than editorial mandates done out of fear of ruffling the wrong kind of feathers.
Some were quick to cry censorship, blame those no-good SJWs, etc., even though there's far more sexually suggestive and explicit stuff left in the game. It certainly wasn't censorship because Ninja Theory was not ordered to make the change against its will. It chose to remove a line it likely found cringeworthy, because it was, for the sake of the production. What it did was something that's common to all entertainment but sometimes gets mistaken for censorship. What it did was editing.
Meanwhile, he defends Final Fantasy XV's post-release changing of the game's story, since it appears to have been done out of a desire to more closely realize the developer's artistic vision, so long as the industry doesn't start using this as a similar crutch to post-release patches, aka merely an excuse to half-ass it during the actual development stage.
I'm inclined to believe, at least on some major level, that Square Enix is motivated primarily by artistic integrity.
Can't wait to try it.
So it definitely appears that Jim has a firm understanding of what the difference is between editing and censorship. But then we have his 2019 Jimquisition video called Screw Steam. There, he rips into the Steam Direct system and how it contains virtually no quality control whatsoever. One of the biggest examples he uses in this video is a game called Rape Day. So what exactly did he find so atrocious about Rape Day? Was it yet another asset flip? Was it yet another wholesale Unit Z clone? Was it literally just a game where the player character can walk around a blank, flat game space at 2 frames per second with absolutely nothing to do, nothing to interact with, and no objectives to complete, which they then proceeded to charge a full $60 for? Well, no, he didn't criticize any of the usual things he criticizes when he usually takes indie Steam asset flips to task. Rather, he was appalled simply by the mere premise of the game. No, seriously, he made no effort to hide the fact that the game deserved to be taken off Steam just on premise alone. His exact words were,
Now, it's a bad idea to be seen selling this game on your storefront. Do you know how I know it's a bad idea? Because it's obviously a bad fucking idea. It's called Rape Day, for crying out loud.
Tell me, Jim, did you actually play the game yourself? Because I can't recall a single thing you said about Rape Day that we couldn't have seen just from the Steam store page alone. He didn't show us any footage that I could clearly identify as coming from this game. He certainly didn't describe to us how repetitive or unbalanced the gameplay was, or how stiff the controls were. So, until I see some evidence to the contrary, I am going to act on the assumption that he did not play Rape Day at all, and is instead shitting all over the game solely on what it purports to be on its face. Hey Jim, you do realize that is a serious breach of journalism ethics, right? To review a game without even playing it? You know that's a serious ethical violation, right? You know how I know that's a serious ethical violation for a video game journalist? Because you yourself told me about this ethical obligation of video game journalism. In your Industry BS video, developer accuses reviewers of not playing his poorly reviewed game. You said the following.
The developer has leveled some pretty fucking serious charges at game reviewers, specifically accusing them of not playing the game. Now, if any of that's true, this is a serious ethical breach that Desolé has blown the lid off here.
But I suppose, when you personally decide that a game is trash just on premise alone, then it's okay to judge a game without playing it. Only when you decide it is okay. Is that the gist of it? In your Screw Steam Jimquisition, You scoff at people siding with you on games like the Slaughtering Grounds, but then turn around and going to bat for the games with offensive premises, and you have the gall to call them hypocrites.
Lately, some people have been trying to defend these games as free speech, which they only started doing once the asset flips and blatantly broken games got racist and homophobic. Now people are going to bat for asset flips. Nobody went to bat for the Slaughtering Grounds when it got removed from Steam, but people will go out of their way to defend AIDS Simulator these days. To that subsect of people, I do see you, by the way. I see what you're doing. Everyone was on board and cheering when it was just Commoner Garden asset flips I was mocking and criticising and saying should be fucked off. But the moment one of them calls themselves AIDS Simulator, oh, then it's a free then I'm a bad censorship man. I see what you do. It's so obvious.
No, Jim. You apparently don't see what these people were doing, because if you did, you would realize that you are indeed advocating for censorship here, not merely quality control. People sided with you when you tore into asset flips like the Slaughtering Grounds, because you played the game and then formed an opinion on it. In that order. You did not rip into the Slaughtering Grounds sight unseen just on what it purported to be on its face. The mere premise of the game, over-the-top blood and gore, was something you were fine with in theory. You criticized the game not for its offensive premise, but for its shoddy execution. That, Jimmy, is what makes all the difference in the world. Now, I want everyone to understand something. While Sterling's views on Rape Day and AIDS Simulator do indeed count as him advocating for censorship, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. The word censorship, especially in the context of offensive topics, often carries a pejorative undertone to it. But there are plenty of examples of censorship in our society that are perfectly socially acceptable, despite them commonly being considered a type of censorship. When you turn on the television and you see naked people with their private areas blurred out, pixelated, and or with black bars over them, that is a type of censorship, but it's a socially acceptable type of censorship. When you turn on the television and people are cussing, but their mouths are blurred out and the audio is replaced with a beep sound effect, that is also a type of censorship, but it's a socially acceptable form of censorship. If you think AIDS Simulator or Rape Day deserve to be censored for their premise alone, that is your right. But you should at least own up to the fact that censorship is what you are asking for. Don't try and rebrand it as editing simply to avoid the stigma that comes with the word censorship. And whatever you do, don't accuse other people of being hypocrites just because they agreed with you on one apple several years ago, but disagree with you about an orange now. They are not the same thing, and you damn well know it. Now, that being said, with it hopefully being firmly established that censorship isn't necessarily a bad thing, just because it counts as censorship, that begs the question, is the thing that Jim Sterling advocates for regarding Rape Day and AIDS Simulator a legitimate type of censorship, or an oppression of free speech? Well, all things considered, and I do believe I am being fair in this assessment, I would have to say that it is the latter. Why do I feel this way? Well, in addition to the fact that he hasn't actually played the game, and therefore shouldn't criticize something sight unseen, let's also not forget that, as evil as rape is, it's still not as bad of a crime as murder. Can we all agree on that? That rape may be a fucking horrible act, but if we had to choose between rape and murder, rape is definitively the lesser of two evils. So why is it that games like Mortal Kombat or Grand Theft Auto get a pass for being games where you can kill people, often in extremely violent, gory, over-the-top, and painful-looking ways, but a game based around a still evil but definitively less evil crime is suddenly too offensive to allow to exist on Steam. Am I the only one who sees just a little bit of a double standard with that? And yes, Jim Sterling specifically has indeed gone to bat for excessive violence in video games.
I do want, however, to talk about violence in games. It's a subject that's concerned me a lot in the past, not because I don't like violent media. No, the concern for me isn't that the violence exists, or even the excessiveness of the violence on display.
So maybe you can answer this one, Jimmy. Though, let's be honest, you're not going to respond to this. What you're likely going to do is just write me off as some troll, even though I'm not, and refuse to entertain my arguments as a substitute for having to actually refute them, which you cannot do. But, for completionist's sake, why is it okay to have video games that have the player character going on mass, indiscriminate killing sprees, but a crime that is definitively less evil than that needs to be censored for being too offensive? And for that matter, during your Screw Steam Jimquisition, you scoff at anyone who calls you a censor. Your exact words are,
Apparently, if you don't allow absolutely everything, if you don't have an anything-goes approach to entertainment distribution, you're censoring things.
However, in earlier videos, you have indeed gone to bat for that very position. In your Jimquisition video titled YouTube Did Ad-Friendly Censorship Dollars in CSGO, you yourself heavily criticized YouTube for capitulating to the wishes of advertisers who don't want their products associated with content they consider to be too offensive for their brand name.
Basically, don't swear and don't rock the boat too much because advertisers don't like it. It's sanitization at the behest of corporate entities who don't want their product associated with certain content they deem themselves better than.
I also would like all of you watching this video right now to take a look at his Jimquisition video called An Extreme Outrage. I won't play a clip from that video because the whole video was designed to be one great big satirical middle finger to the concept of censorship in order to avoid ruffling the wrong kind of feathers. I won't play a clip from that video because I'd have to play the whole thing. So let me get this straight, Jimmy. You are a proponent for free speech and an opponent of censorship or marketing disassociation whenever it's in your interests to oppose censorship or marketing disassociation. But as soon as you find something that you personally don't like, then all of a sudden anyone with half a brain should want to disassociate their brands from it. In other words, you, and only you, get sole authority to decide on behalf of all of society when it is and isn't appropriate to censor in the name of remaining inoffensive. Is that the gist of it? If that is the gist of it, then, Mr. Sterling, I regret to inform you that this makes you a certified, card-carrying, official, filthy hypocrite. Before I sign off, I want to make one thing perfectly clear. I did not make this video out of hate for Jim Sterling. As I said at the beginning of this video, I am actually a fan of Jim Sterling. When he's on his A-game, he can really crank out some eye-opening stuff. My purpose for this video is not to troll, but to encourage him to improve. In the 1 in a million chance he sees this video, I hope he can take it to heart and reflect on his own self-contradictions. Perhaps this video may motivate him to post a few clarification videos, kind of like his Jimquisition's Talent is an Asset and How Not to Free to Play Like a Total Wanker. Just remember this little nugget of wisdom. The best criticism comes from your existing fans, not your haters, because they are the ones who only criticize when they need to, and who do so out of a desire to see you improve, not a desire to demotivate you. Well, that took a lot longer than I originally thought it would. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe. Also, if you'd like to see this channel grow, please consider supporting me directly either on Patreon or with a channel membership, so that I can one day do this full time. In the meantime, however, I am Acerthorn, and I will see you guys later.